Hi, everybody. This is Eve Harrow, and you're listening to Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. I am a little bit sweatier than usual because I'm in Miami right now. It's Friday, a little bit before Shabbat, September 6, 2019, the sixth day of Elul 5779. I was in Los Angeles for a couple days at the beginning of this week. Universal Studios is still as much fun as it was 15 years ago, leaving that aside. And then I went up to Seattle where I had a wonderful meeting with Torah-observant Christians who love Israel, and we're so happy to learn more about Israel. And this morning I flew into Miami, and I'm going to be, well, by the time you hear this, I will have been scholar in residence at the Shul in Belle Harbour. So I'm taking the opportunity to sit with no less than the mayor of Belle Harbour, who actually wants to exercise before Shabbat, so we may make this quick. Gabe Groisman, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, and welcome to Belle Harbour.
So I've known you for a while, and I know that even though you're the mayor of Belle Harbour, you love your heart's in Israel, and you do as much as you can for the Jewish people. So what do you do here, first of all, in Belle Harbour, for the people here? Like, how did you become mayor of Belle Harbour?
So about 5 years ago, I ran for city council here in Belle Harbour. Belle Harbour is a small, exclusive municipality just north of Miami Beach. Our residents range from, there's about between 4,000 and 10,000 residents at any time in Belle Harbour because it's a big vacation community. So in the winter, we're always full. And it's a beautiful seaside community. And I do everything that a mayor does in a city. We have our own police force. We have our own parks department, a legal department, public works. And we do everything to keep the city safe and to beautify the city and help keep property values high and all the fun stuff that goes along with running a city.
Well, you had a little bit of a scare this week, right? Because the hurricane, maybe Dorian was coming in, was not coming in. I mean, we're sitting here and none of the trees are down because it passed. But like, what did you have to do? Did people leave town? Yeah,
so there wasn't an evacuation order, although we were very close to issuing one. But yes, we were already in emergency operation mode. We initiated an emergency operations center with our chiefs of police, and yes, about 60% of our municipality evacuated. Our hotels, we have the only one of two 6-star hotels in South Florida, the St. Regis. They evacuated. The Ritz-Carlton evacuated. The Seaview evacuated, etc. So we were getting ready for the worst, and all the way through Saturday morning of last week. We were expecting a direct hit of a Category 5 hurricane, which is the worst of it, the worst. So we were doing everything that you do to get a city ready for the worst, and then it turned. So thank God. So
somebody prayed well, I guess, last Shabbat.
There's actually a news story going around. I accompanied our governor, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, to Israel about 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And, well, time flies. It was more than that. I think it was in February. But anyway, and they had asked him when he put a note in the Kotel on the Western Wall what he wrote down, and he said, "I prayed that there shouldn't be any hurricanes in Florida." Wow. And someone asked him in a press conference just yesterday if the reason why the hurricane didn't hit Florida was because he prayed at the Western Wall, and he said, "I did. That was my note. In fact, my note on the Western Wall, and the hurricane was coming to us, and it turned last second. I'm not going to question the man above."
Well, you just never know. But that's a pretty heavy responsibility. I mean, there's a financial element here, right? If you're telling expensive hotels to evacuate, there's a financial element. If people are leaving their homes, maybe worrying that someone's going to break in. I mean, this is a lot on your shoulders. I know it's a small town, and you're minimizing it, but given where you are, you do have some pretty heavyweight decisions to make.
Sure, but that's why I joined. I joined my city council initially, and then I was voted in as mayor 2 years later. Because this isn't just my community, this is where my family lives, and the decisions I make directly affect myself, my family, my neighbors, and my friends. So people don't realize that, a lot of times in day-to-day life, you're always focused on federal government or national government, but the government that affects you the most is your local government. So It's absolutely a responsibility, but it's a great opportunity.
But in addition to that, you are, I know, involved with greater politics. Like you said, you brought the governor to Israel. And I know that you also, being a lawyer, have been involved with some of the BDS, the boycott, divest, and sanction movements against Israel, which seem, I don't know, do you think they're gaining steam? Do you think they're cutting back? Like, you get different opinions on that. Some people say, no, it hasn't affected anything. It's just been a lot of noise. And other people, like I know people who they're not being able to sell their things out of Israel because of BDS. So where do you feel about that?
So I'll start with the end, which is the BDS movement. If you look at it from a narrow perspective and say, is it having a financial effect on the state of Israel? it's failing. The state of Israel, year over year, the economy continues to grow, tourism numbers continue to grow, etc. But the goal of the BDS movement isn't actually, in fact, to have a financial impact on the state of Israel today. The way I see it is the goal of the state of the BDS movement outside of Israel is to vilify and separate and destroy the Jewish community, and they are doing a good job in that sense, and we're doing everything we can to fight it. My involvement in that actually started in that I was the first in the country to write and pass an anti-BDS city ordinance in Belle Harbour, and that was.
So what does that mean?
So what it means is if you're going to enter into a contract with the city, so any municipal contract for infrastructure, for building a new project, etc., you have to affirm that you're not part of any boycott of any authorized trading partner of the United States, including Israel. And when I wrote and passed that, the reason why we did that was we have a local church here in Belle Harbour, which is part of the UCC, the United Church of Christ, which unfortunately in 2015, in the summer of 2015, voted nationwide to boycott and divest from Israel. And I wanted to do something about it. And at that point, only the state of South Carolina had an anti-BDS law. And I got in touch with Representative Alan Clements, who now is very well known in the pro-Israel circles. He's actually Mormon. Most people don't know that. And was very pro-Israel and does everything he can for the state of Israel. And that's a lot. I got in touch with him, got my hands on the original drafts of that act when it was a bill, and I converted it. As a lawyer, put my hands on it and converted it into a city ordinance. It's very different, and we were able to write and pass it. And then we had a whole interaction with the church, which was very incredible. It was actually the first documented use of any of these anti-BDS laws. And
how did the church react?
So they sort of ignored it at first, and then they came back to the city about 3 months after, asking for us to enter into a contract with them to expand their facilities. And instead of just reject them, to tell a very long story short, but instead of just reject the application, I said to them, 3 months ago, we were the first city in the country to pass this ordinance. And I know what the UCC did just a few months ago, so I can't approve this. But rather than reject your application, I want to defer the item, and I invite you to come meet with me. And I had this surreal meeting with the leaders of this church, and where I helped explain to them a few things. One, I said, if we don't have to have this discussion as a government official, this is just the law, I have to enforce it. But if you want to have the discussion of what the BDS movement is, we can. And we did. And they invited the discussion, and we had a very detailed discussion. I let them know that by joining the BDS movement, they were now part of the largest anti-Semitic movement in the world since the Nazis. And they had to understand what it came from and explain to them about Omar Barghouti and the different founders, Abu Asad al-Khalil, and the founders of the BDS movement, and what they've said and what their goals are. And it ended with them publicly rejecting the call of the national church to boycott the state of Israel, and they put their money where their mouth was when they had $2.9 million in the United Church's investment fund, the UCCIF, which had proudly announced that they were now Israel free. And they took out all their money from that fund and announced to the church that the reason they did it was because it divested from Israel.
Wow. So the next step is to get them to take that money and invest it in Israel.
That's up to
I'm just giving you something else to do.
That's up to them. But it's been great because ever since then, it's taken me on a whirlwind trip to the United Nations a couple times to speak with Danny Danon on different conferences against BDS. And my ordinance is now in cities across the country, and I've been working with states across the country in the last 3 years. Now there's 27 states, I think 28 now with Kentucky just this week, which passed anti-BDS laws. And so I've been lucky enough by being an early entrant into into that movement to be involved with a lot of what's happening on the legislative level.
Well, I wouldn't say lucky as much as very persistent. I mean, you decided to do it, and you did it, and other people followed you. So anybody who's listening who's saying, oh, but it's like a little town, Belle Harbour, but you can punch way above your weight and get others to follow you by going with your beliefs.
Yeah, that's the message when I speak to groups about that story. That's the most important message. You caught right on it, because it's not even just about this. These days with so much happening, everybody feels helpless. It's very easy to feel helpless. But Belle Harbour, it's a small town. It's known because we have the world's most luxurious shopping center, profitable shopping center in the world, Belle Harbour Shops. So it's known, people have heard of it, but it's a small town. We're not the city of Miami, we're not the city of New York. But when you're small, you can get things done quicker. And with the advent of the internet and social media, it's easy to get your message out. And one thing I've learned after having conversations with mayors from all over the world, because I've now founded an organization of mayors all over the world to deal with this, is that no one likes to be first. People want to see who jumps in first, what the reaction is. So once you can show someone what you did, and then you show them the press and the reaction that you got, the negative and the positive, they can say, okay, you know what, I can deal with that. And that can be applied to so many different things, so many different advocate things. If you want to be an activist towards anything, you can make a splash no matter where you are or what size you are or your organization is.
You're like the mayor Nachshon, right? Nachshon's the first guy who goes into the Red Sea, and only then does it part. Someone's got to go in first. So are you doing any work outside of the United States and working on any legislation?
So not on legislation per se, but I founded, along with Chaim Bibas, who's the mayor of Modi'in, which is a city in Israel. I know you know. He's also the head of all the mayors of Israel, the municipal government organization in Israel. So me, along with Mayor Bibas and Mayor Uwe Becker, who's the mayor of Frankfurt, Germany, the three of us founded Mayors Against Hatred.
How did a German mayor get involved with this?
So Uwe Becker is an incredible man. I met him. I was invited to speak at an anti-Semitism conference in Jerusalem 2 years ago, and he spoke on the stage before I did, and he really got my attention. He's not Jewish, and he's German, and he's a big advocate for Israel. And his theory, essentially, not to speak for him, but as I understand it, is that in Germany and in many parts of the world, you can't be neutral. So you're either going to be totally anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, actively hating the Jews and the state of Israel, or the opposite. There's no room for the middle. And he says in Frankfurt, it's not a place where he'll tolerate anything as far as extremism or racism or anti-Semitism. And the only way to do that is to be very active on the other side of the spectrum. So I met him, and then the following year I met Mayor Bibas when he invited me to speak at the International Mayors Conference in Tel Aviv. And we were brainstorming of what we can do to make this bigger. He wanted it to attach Israel to this. Israel hasn't been all that active in this space as much.
What, in the BDS?
Despite what people hear, right. Definitely 2 years ago they hadn't been active at all. Just now they've put some money, and they put Gilad Erdan, who's doing a nice job.
I think it took Israelis a while to realize what was happening here. And as you said, this is about besmirching and vilifying Israel, having nothing to do with finances. They were focused, I think, on the economic side, and it took them a while to wake up and realize what was really happening here.
Yeah, and to be clear, there is a financial aspect to it, and they're fighting hard. We saw and followed the Airbnb debacle, where Airbnb decided not to rent or not to allow Jews in Judea and Samaria.
By the way, I was the lead plaintiff on that case in California, and we won it. We had great lawyers, but that was huge. But didn't Canada just recently say something about the wine? They were not letting certain wines in?
Right. So in Canada, and I'm now starting next week, I'll be involved formally in that case as well. But in Canada and Europe are both having labeling issues, where they're saying they're not going to label products made by Jews coming from Judea and Samaria as products of Israel. And in Europe, there's also a case that was brought in France saying that it wouldn't be accurate to call them products of Israel if they're coming from that area. And there was already an Advocate General's opinion, which is an opinion that the court can take or not take. We're waiting now in the next month. But it's really it highlights what it is we're fighting against, because that opinion in Europe says that products coming from the West Bank or Judea and Samaria that are made by Jews cannot be labeled products of Israel. If they're made by non-Jews, they should be labeled products of Palestine.
Which is a fake country.
Which is a state that doesn't exist. Even just to be intellectually honest, if anyone who looks at this, if you're the biggest two-state solution advocate in the world, what you're advocating for is the creation of a second state called Palestine, because it doesn't exist yet. That's why you have to have the movement of a two-state solution if that's your position. So right, it doesn't exist. And again, it's not about, this was the same issue in the Airbnb case. This isn't about who has sovereignty over the land. You're making a distinction between Jews and non-Jews. That's just discrimination.
Right. Wow. You know, there's a guy, I'm sure you know this, a Samaritan on Mount Gerizim who makes excellent trina, Harbour trina. And I've been up there. He has 2 sets of containers. And one of the containers goes out to Europe, and it says Harbour trina, made in Palestine. And the other set, which is all kosher, says it in Hebrew, and it goes to Israel, and it says whatever, made in Israel. So, and his name is Yosef, which is hilarious, because Joseph is buried right there. And I said to him, "You're brilliant." He said, "Yes, I am." He said, "This is the stupidest thing, but I'm playing the game, and I'm making a lot of money."
Yeah, it's a real issue, and there's issues that people will be seeing. Hopefully, we won't, but most likely we'll be seeing in the next year or two in Europe with regards to the banks and public companies under the code of what they call CSR, corporate social responsibility, which is just this generic thing that companies have social responsibility, which is true. You can't just hide behind your entity and do terrible things. But the BDS movement has really infiltrated the CSR movement to try to create within the movement a requirement that to be to have corporate social responsibility, you also cannot do business with Israel or in Israel. So people will be seeing that it's coming out of a different committee in the United Nations and in different banking regulatory bodies in Europe. And there's people fighting against it.
So, okay, so on the one hand, we're talking about products coming out of Judea and Samaria that certain countries say, if it's labeled made in Israel, we're not taking it because we don't recognize that Judea and Samaria is part of Israel. I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and all my listeners know exactly where I stand on this, that I think Israel should have a long time ago applied Israeli law in Yudav Shomron, but technically speaking and legally speaking, don't they have a point? I mean, if the Israeli government hasn't applied Israeli law in Yudav Shomron, and these are areas that are technically not part of the state of Israel, legally, if someone just wants to go by the law, these countries that are saying if it's labeled made in Israel are not necessarily wrong. It isn't Israel, right? So there's a few issues here. One is targeting Jews and not Arabs. That's already, I'm going to call that racist. You didn't, but I'm going to use that word. To say we're not buying from Jews, we're buying from Arabs, that's already something else. That has nothing to do with the product. But I'm just talking on a legal basis. Is Israel here, the Israeli government here, maybe part of the problem?
Well, you asked a different question at the end. Is Israel part of the problem? Right. Yes, in a way. Israel's a lot of the problems that we see in the state of Israel today, like the Temple Mount, the only place in the world that Jews can't pray. It's a self-inflicted wound by the Israeli government. But this is a little bit different because what doesn't apply in Judea and Samaria is Israeli civil law. But Israeli military law applies, Israeli customs law applies, Israeli business law applies, Israeli taxes apply. Mm-hmm. These are Israeli businesses and products that come in and out of Israeli ports and are governed by the state of Israel. Mm-hmm. Is it by military law in some aspects as opposed to civil law? Yes. Is that part of the problem? Maybe, if you were so deep in the weeds. Mm-hmm. The second problem is Israel and the Judea and Samaria is not the only disputed territory in the world. If you want to if you want to accept what some people say that it's occupied, which I don't, but let's accept it for argument's sake, it's not the only occupied territory in the world. And the question is, when you're looking at Europe, what does the European Union do? What does the European Court of Justice do when they're taking products from Crimea or from Turkey or from other areas where there's occupied land? And the answer is it's always labeled by the country, with the name of the country that controls the area. Mm-hmm. Period. And
so there's a double standard here. Well, this is something we brought up in the Airbnb case as well. You're not delisting people in Cyprus because there's a question about what's happening there.
We have a guest in case you hear her. I'm blessed to have 5 daughters, and my 3-year-old.
One cuter than the next, incidentally.
My 3-year-old daughter Rebecca just ran out to join the podcast.
Want to say hi? They can't hear you, sweetheart. Okay, so that was one question, right? So thank you for making that clarification that it could say Israel and that there is that double standard. But doesn't BDS sometimes slide away from just Judea and Samaria and Israel itself, which is the whole point, as you and I both feel, of the movement?
Sure, it's not what you and I feel; it's what they say. So again, similar to the issue with the Palestinian Authority or Hamas at points. A lot of times people, especially in the Jewish community, would like to project onto our enemies what it is they say. But we shouldn't project what we wish their position would be. We just have to listen to what their position is. And if you listen to Omar Barghouti himself, who said many, many times, and you can Google it, YouTube it, anything you want, you can hear videos, so you don't have to trust me, who said that no self-respecting Palestinian would accept anything but a one-state solution everywhere in the state of Israel. from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. If
To
geographically,
replace Israel with a country called Palestine, not live side by side.
correct. It's their own words. Asud Abu al-Khalil from California, who's also one of the founders, says the same things.
Now she's talking.
Let me take her inside with me. So the words of the founders themselves are clear that the purpose of the BDS movement is to destroy the entire state of Israel. The second point is, I'm a lawyer by trade, and it's my main parnasa, my main living is as an attorney, as a litigator actually. I can make the argument as good as anyone else that the BDS movement is not anti-Semitic, it's not about the whole state of Israel. But the reality, outside of the philosopher's room, the reality on the ground of, you go to any BDS event, any BDS rally, if you go to the National Students for Justice in Palestine event like they had in California last year, and just listen to them. Listen to the words, not just of the people in the crowd, but also the speakers and the materials they hand out. And there's no question, A, that it's an anti-Semitic movement, and B, that they're looking for the destruction of the state of Israel. Period. There every other argument that's made is a philosophical, academic argument. In practice, the BDS movement is anti-Semitic, and it is seeking only the destruction of the state of Israel and the replacement of it with another Arab state.
You know, this is one of the ironies because we're so proud of how strong Israel is. I mean, of our soldiers, the risks that our soldiers take, the army, and it's been a hard battle, and it's not over yet. You know, we just had issues in the north, we have constant issues in the south, and the next war is just a matter of time. But we feel safe like I feel safe in Israel. Like I know that there'll be a price to be paid because we live in a terrible neighborhood, but I feel great about the IDF and really honored, and I think it's no less than a miracle that the Jews know how to fight again after 2,000 years of being helpless. But it's like our enemies, because they couldn't beat us militarily, are now finding other ways to get through to us by, you know, what they say morality or you know, something like the BDS movement.
So, not to get biblical, let's say, but...
Why not?
Okay, fine.
With my audience, you can get biblical.
Okay, good. Look, every year in Passover, we read the Haggadah, and it says there that in every generation they're going to rise up to try to destroy us. And that's all it is. What you're saying is absolutely correct. They know militarily they cannot destroy us. Even Hezbollah, who now is in the north trying to rev things up against Israel, they don't even have support within the Arab world anymore, because now much of the Arab world supports Israel, either quietly, either explicitly or implicitly. So yes, they move to a different battlefield. The battle's never over. But we have to remember, as Jews, it's important that every generation they've risen up to destroy us. And
so having said that, as Jews, but so many Jews are on the other side.
Because Jews, the Jewish people as the eternal minority group in the world, and with it's a culture where your heart and your outreach to the community is so integral to your culture and to your identity. It's very hard for the Jewish community to just say, you know, stand up proud and say, look, we're proud Jews, we're right, we have a right to be in the state of Israel, we're not going to go anywhere, this is who we are. Zionism is an integral part of Judaism, which means it's an integral part of each of us in our hearts, and nothing's going to change that. And when someone comes up with a narrative that's totally false and that's goal is to destroy us, rather than saying there's two sides to every story, that's true, but one side is wrong, their urge is to say the truth is somewhere in the middle, and they try to appease those who are really our enemies, and that's really a downfall. We've seen it generation after generation. You see it 5-6 years before the beginning of the Holocaust. And you can go back all the way to the times of the Jewish exodus of Egypt, when only 30% or so or less of Jews even left Egypt because they didn't trust that they were going to be taken somewhere. So we've always dealt with this issue, but I now have a positive spin on it, because I've been now, I can't say knee deep, I could say neck deep in the fight against.
And he's tall, by the way, so when he says neck deep, he's really in
the fight against anti-Semitism and the BDS movement. And I can tell you, and you fall into this category, and your family falls into this category, is that the movement of strong, proud, powerful Jews that are out there making an impact is growing at a much faster pace than we're losing Jews through intermarriage and through apathy and through disconnection. So that's what we have to focus on. We have to focus on continuing to strengthen the Jewish community, ties with the non-Jewish community also, but without ever checking our identity at the door. No one else in the world is asked to check their identity at the door but the Jewish people. In the United States, no one else is asked whether they have dual loyalty but Jews. But I don't think, I know that it's something that Jews cannot do, which is check their Judaism at the door. That's why I hate it when someone says, as a Jew, I respond like this. Of course, that's how you have to respond to every question. That's who you are. That's part of who you are. It's part of who we should be, and we shouldn't hide that.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the heartbreaking things. But you know what? I think your friend, the mayor from Frankfurt, he has a message for Jews, not just for people, for Jews. Be proud of who you are. You're either fighting the good fight or you're on the other side. But if you're in the middle, I mean, my feeling is if you're apathetic and you're in the middle, and my listeners have heard this for a long time, you're letting the good guys win. Because the bad guys win, excuse me. Whoa. Because the bad guys don't stop for a second. And if you're not actively fighting the good fight, then you're allowing them to get ahead. And you are definitely actively fighting the good fight for whatever you can. And I know about your love for Israel and how often you're there, and that you're a strong Jew, and that's a wonderful thing. So I'm going to let you go because I know that you want to get in your time before Shabbat. Any other thing that stands out that you'd like my listeners to know about what you've been doing this year?
Sure. So last year in Belle Harbour, we were the first government entity in the country, really in the world, to codify the uniform definition of anti-Semitism. It's a definition that was put out by Natan Sharansky and through the Holocaust Museum. It gives the classic forms of anti-Semitism, examples of it, but also the modern forms as it relates to anti-Israel. And it's the 3 Ds, the delegitimization, demonization, and double standards. So what we did was, people have been trying to find ways to utilize that. It's been out there. People speak about it in conferences. So I decided to pass an ordinance here in Belle Harbour, which is when law enforcement is investigating a potential hate crime against the Jewish community, which is the community that experiences more religious-based hate crimes than any other community in the United States, that they are to reference the definition. So to give them the tools, law enforcement doesn't understand the tools when someone is being beat up and they're screaming "Free Palestine." What is that, a hate crime? Why are they hitting this guy? Is he an Israeli government official? No, he's getting attacked because he's Jewish. But they don't have those tools. So we passed it in Belle Harbour, and again, people said, this is Belle Harbour. It's a small town. Why do you need to pass it? Within 20 days of passing it, the Miami-Dade County Chiefs of Police Association, they represent or protect almost 4 million people, in the Miami-Dade County area, asked me to come present the ordinance to them. And after one hearing, they adopted it unanimously, and it's now in the procedures of every law enforcement agency in Miami-Dade County. Wow. And just 2 months later, the state of North Carolina then followed us after we had followed them on the anti-BDS land. And now just this year, we had the state of Florida, and I went up there to testify. I helped write it, along with Representative Randy Fine and others, to codify that same definition. And it wasn't for law enforcement, for the state. What they wanted to focus on was universities and education facilities. And what they said was, this is the definition of anti-Semitism, and it's the same definition, and that anti-Semitism needs to be protected in the same way you protect racism. So it's at the same level for protection for Jewish students. And it passed. It wasn't an easy task. It was a lot of work earlier this year to get it passed, but it was passed. And now hopefully that's a preview for everybody that's listening, because in the next year, we're working on many, many states that are looking to present this in their states. So hopefully we'll see.
So if you're listening from wherever you live, in the United States, out of the United States, you have an address. If you're on Facebook, people can get in touch with you. Yes?
Facebook, it's at Groisman Gabriel. Twitter is at Gabe Groisman, and if I may be the easiest human being in the world to find if you Google me, phone numbers, email.
Google father of 5 girls, you'll also find his face there. No, but really, get in touch with him. He's done a lot of the heavy lifting, and see if you can't get this passed, because I remember reading about swastikas on the doors of the Jewish students at the FSU at Florida State University already a few years ago. So you wouldn't think Florida would have such an issue, but it's everywhere now.
It's everywhere. Florida still comparatively, it's very light, but that I think gives us room to operate and to be the leaders across the country.
Okay, Gabe Groisman, thank you so much. Eve Harrow, the Land of Israel Network. Thanks to Ben and to Tabitha. So take care, everybody. Goodbye for now.
Israel this past week hosted the 2019 Flag Football European Championship. Josh Haston here, host of Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. Check out my show this week, an interview with Steve Leibowitz, president of American football in Israel. Get all the details on this major tournament, first time ever, hosted in the city of Jerusalem. Don't miss my show, Israel Uncensored. I got you covered in the world of flag football, only here on the Land